So, hello and welcome to our third webinar about risk assessment in the area of anti-financial crime. So today I can welcome you on the focus topic on how to identify risk and how to model risk. As always, I would start to give you an introduction. Me, myself, it's Dirk Findeisen. That's the easy part. But as always, I have Khan with me. She's our lead business consultant and also product owner in regards to the risk assessment platform. And she will provide you, let's say, the use cases, so the more practical part of today's webinar. If I'm always saying we, I mean the MSG Group. MSG Group is an international IT business and IT consulting company with more than 10,000 consultants acting in 33 locations worldwide, as you can see here on the map. And MSG Rethink Compliance, so really the we that I'm talking about, are the anti-financial crime compliance experts. So we're taking care about the risk and compliance management program, whether it's about AML, whether it's about CFT, fraud, KYC, ABC, and the wider ecosystem. Also today, we have an agenda, as always, 4 chapters that we would like to go through in the next 35 minutes with you. I would like to give you an overview first about the risk management process, then talking about how to identify risk, what kind of sources and techniques can be used for that. And then I would like to, let's say, go down onto the risk model anatomy, so describing the parts of a risk model and the life cycle behind it, and then handing over to Khan for practical use cases. Afterwards, hopefully, we have some time for your questions, and hopefully we will be able to answer those questions. So in regards to the whole logistics, you will figure out that you are muted, but nevertheless, you have the opportunity using the chat functionality to ask your questions. We will then collect them and hopefully be able to answer them. If we are not able to answer them in our Q&A session, we will answer them by email later on. So the most common question is whether or not you get the slides. Yes, you will get the slides. You will receive an email where you can then download the slides and the recording of the session. Also, to make it more interesting, we are also interested in gathering your opinion about some of the questions we prepared. And for that one, we are using Menti. So you can either use the QR code on this slide when you would like to answer the polls by using your mobile phone. Or you use the browser and go to menti.com with this specific enter code. You will also see in the chat the URL that leads you directly to the site. And before we come to those questions, we will also provide you the information on how to connect to Menti and provide your answers. So we would appreciate to get your feedback and also to gather some information on where to deep dive in our next webinars in the future. So let's start with the first chapter for today's webinar, and that's the risk management process. I'm not going into all of those topics that you can see here because, as I mentioned, it's the third webinar. And in the first webinar, we went through this process in detail. We defined what is required if you go from a group perspective into a legal entity, into a branch office. So that should be all known. And if not, you can get those information also. So I would like to go one step above this process and just give another perspective on the management behind this process. And to identify risk, you have first of all define the context you would like to identify the risk. So even if we think about anti-financial crime as one part of your risk universe, we have to think about whether we would like to talk about AML risk, fraud risk, cyber risk, or KYC risk, and so on and so on. And then you can go into identifying the risk for this specific context. After identifying the risk, you typically evaluate the risk, you analyze the risk, and come to some mitigation ideas on how to mitigate those risks, and come from your cross risk to your net risk. You have to treat those risks, you have to manage those risks. And then from time to time, you have to update your whole risk assessment, because there might be legal changes coming in that might force you to update your risk assessment, but also some business changes, a new product that you would like to establish in a specific market, where you need to update then the specific risk assessments. And you have to always re-identify the risk, or at least identify whether you need to change the risk categories, the risk factors, or the identified risk, or not. So that's more or less done by the monitoring and testing portion. And it's not about monitoring system, it's really about monitoring the whole process, and testing the effectiveness of the controls, for example, testing also the risk model, and we will go on that one in a moment. So second topic is, after clarifying the process and identifying where we are when identifying the risk, is how can I identify those risks? So we try to group some samples on how to what you can use to identify the risk on this slide, and I would just grab out some of them that might be not that known, but also have to address the known ones. So from a source perspective, of course, it's clear to use statistic information out of your KYC screening systems, or your AML monitoring, transaction screening systems, and so on. And of course, you're using questionnaires and the feedback out of those questionnaires. You can use industry benchmarks. So that's I guess all standard. But what are you doing if you have a very let's say innovative product that you offer, like an embedded banking product, an embedded platform for your ecosystem, for example, where you don't have checklists, where it's not standardized like other standard banking products. So then you have structured techniques or creative techniques, and I guess I would just pick out Ishikawa, a fishbone diagram, because I think that's not that common. You heard about maybe when you had university studies about that one. And it's really about identifying risk by using this fishbone diagram and visually representing the factors that contribute to a problem. And as you know, a problem is an unidentified risk. So you come to the risk as well, and that's a great structured technique to identify risk in a field where you don't have standards, where you don't have checklists, and then can work with those external resources. You can use creative techniques like brainwriting. I'm just going to a brainwriting technique that it's called 635. That helps you in a group of experts to really, in a very fast mode, in a very short amount of time, to identify nearly all of the risk that you can think about it. Because it's not only you thinking about the risk involved, it's also about all the other experts thinking about those techniques. It's brainwriting because everyone needs to write it down on cards. So then you can group it all, and it's similar to the Delphi technique and so on. And then the more modern ones is about going through data and or crowdsourcing. So crowdsourcing might be a topic for, let's say, what I call the embedded banking platform. That might be usable. But if it's about, let's say, using big data analytics, you always have the problem in gathering the data and feeding the data into this sort of analytics engine, which might give you some challenges. So from my perspective, it really is, I think, the main advantage of getting to vary those techniques and using those techniques is really to avoid blind spots and, of course, biases, and to help to identify a risk in less standardized and or innovative products, as I mentioned. So really combine the sources, vary the techniques, and of course, automate whatever you can automate. Of course, there are best practices and worst practices. So my personal opinion is that you always learn better from worst practices, because you always have a sort of a smile in your face when thinking about the failures of others that you would like to avoid by just learning out of them. But nevertheless, typically the world is talking about best practices. And if I would like to grab out two best practices to focus on, I would really say it's about diversifying your teams that you're using for risk identification. So include members from different departments, levels, areas of expertise that are involved in this risk identification process or in this risk management process at all, but are not using this one expert. Because if you're using this one expert, that's a worse practice. You will always get a bias. Using an expert, he is really focusing on one specific topic, but is missing other topics. So it's also about generating blind spots. But that's only our experience. That's how we deal with it and how we advise and consult our customers. Now I would like to hand over to Khan to lead you to our through our two questions to gather your opinion about that topic. So Khan, please feel free.
Thank you. I will let you or give you some seconds to be able to scan the code and also to join the Mentimeter. And then I will switch over to the presentation so that we all can see the live results. And as Dirk said in the beginning, you can also find a direct link in the chat. And if you need the QR code, we can also send you via the chat one more time. So let's go to our Mentimeter poll. I will start with the first question. Yeah, and it's about the sources that Dirk just covered. And we would like to know, and we're interested about what sources are you using for your risk identification. So you will see three text fields so that you can name three of the sources that you are using. And when you hit the submit button, then we can see your live responses here on screen. Please feel free to take one of the examples to see on the left, on the right-hand side, or of course, all the sources that you are using that you cannot find here on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's also a creative technique to just think about and just write what you're thinking about. It's really not about really going into the details. Just the first topics that comes to your mind are always the best ones.
And we see, sorry, Dirk, just quickly, the historical data and checklist were also the biggest letters, and this means that we have more than just one response related to that source.
Yeah, but also market trends. I think that's also interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
guess market trends you can get from various sources, external sources. That's interesting. I guess it's more on the threat side to get the market trends, so to derive the risk out of it. It's changing, but it stays with the historical data, which is clearly one of the main sources. Great, cool. Thanks for your participation.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's go to our next questions. And this is about the techniques. We have a list of 12 of the techniques. So please select all of those that you already use, you already have experiences with, and please start with the most useful technique you find. And we will also give you some seconds to go through the list quickly and start ranking the techniques that you are using. So we have done this webinar and also this poll in our German area, German speaking area as well. And I think we have a slightly different picture here, Dirk, right?
Yep, that's right. So you're working more with risk matrices and scenario analysis, which is, well, yeah. But now checklist is coming. See.
Yeah.
I like this
Falling
representation
behind.
because it's really interesting. So of course, as I mentioned, I anticipated that the Ishikawa diagram is not really often used. The attack model and morphological field is also a very unknown topic. Comes from law enforcement agencies, by the way, to think about how an attacker would behave to reach his goals, and then derive what kind of preventions you can take and what kind of risk do you have. Yeah, but I guess it's a clear voting. So risk matrices and checklists and scenario analysis obviously are the top three. So checklist and scenario analysis on the same level. So what if analysis is then the third one. So cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's also worth noting that we have all techniques selected at least. Thank you. And we will return to the presentation. And I will also hand over back to Dirk with the next topic. So it will show in 1 second. Dirk, 1 second, please. So now we are at the...
Perfect. So taking over. Thank you, Khan. So let's talk about the risk modeling. So everyone talks about risk modeling, but having discussions on a variety of events, I'm always figuring out that everyone has a slightly different opinion about what is included into a risk model. So let's think about the risk model anatomy and the components. So first of all, if you think about the risk model, I guess it's clear that you input some data and you are expecting to get some data or results out of this risk model. So actually you put in some data and you're expecting a risk validation or evaluation as a result. So typically what is common when discussing the risk model is, of course, you have risk factors to think about. You have assumptions around those risk factors and the dependencies of those risks. And you bring in the feedback loops, the expert opinions, and so on. You have to make sure that you validate also the risk factors, the assumption, the feedback loop. So you have a sort of a validation layer, of course. And then somehow the result needs to be reported so that you can get an output of the model. Whether it's really reporting, just think about reporting as a process and not as a tool, and then you can easily agree with me. But again, there's at least two topics missing. So the first one is the model inventory. Thinking about the risk universe, the model inventory is very much known in the world of modeling financial risk, because typically the regulators will giving you explicitly upfront the information what kind of risk model you have to use for what kind of risk. So the model inventory is about mathematical models, different mathematical models, simulation topics, and so on, that you can use as part of your risk model. When talking about the anti-financial crime, so when a few years back, it was just about counting of alerts. And then you group those alerts, you have a threshold, and all alerts counting over these thresholds are at risk. And then you group them by numbers into low, medium, high. But at least when the international standard comes up with 5 risk categories, most likely most of the customers switch to a scorecard model, which is, let's say, it's still an easy mathematical model, but it's a sort of a mathematical model where you have to define what kind of scorecarding effects you have, what kind of dominators are in there, and so on, because whatever your risk score is, a PEP is a PEP, and a PEP is still a high risk topic. So you have to model this one. And that kind of modeling, though these predefined models are part of your model inventory. And then, and you heard about by using technology, it's about you have to make sure that it's really accurate, that nothing is missing, and that the whole processing is somehow transparent, so that you always know if you input this one, that you can understand why you get to this output. And that's done in the governance layer. So you might have heard about the governance report, governance or model governance report, and so on. And that's where you make sure that you have the right transparency and provide the explainability to an internal, but also to an external auditor who wants to get an information about the risk model that you're using and how the risk model is working. So if you have the risk model, so how is it now working from a life cycle perspective? So first of all, you have typically to collect data and then prepare the data, because especially if you need statistical or mathematical models, not all of the data fits into those models. If you put in the wrong data into the model, you will get wrong results. It's not about garbage in, garbage out, but somehow like this one. So then obviously not each model is able to work properly for each of the risks. So you have to select the right model out of your model inventory. Then you have to develop it, meaning to adopt it to your specific needs that might be on the product line, that might be on the countryside, meaning geographical risk, and so on and so on. But let's assume you can use it with low degree of modification. Nevertheless, you have to test it. You have to test the model whether it's providing valid results. After the testing, you can then deploy it and can use it in production, can integrate it into your front office systems and back office systems to provide you with the right results. And overall, you need to monitor it. You need to monitor what kind of data is flowing into the model, and at least what kind of results is coming out and what is the quality of the results. That's at least what you need to do, because based out of this kind of a monitoring, you then decide whether the model needs to be retired because it's, let's say, the quality of the results is getting less and less accurate, or meaning the quality is increasing. So then decreasing. So then you have to, let's say, decide to replace the model by another one, meaning retiring the actual one. That's as more technology you're using, for example, machine learning, code, and so on, that becomes more true. The reality when not using that much of technology is that the monitoring comes out with the need to retrain, to fine-tune the model, which then is the model development, goes into the model development. So adjusting the model to get more accurate or better quality of results. So that's more or less the life cycle of your risk model. And honestly, just to be sure here, it's not only about having one risk model that rules all your anti-financial crime risk. You might have different risk models and then one model that controls all those other models. So that's more the reality. And by saying that, I will close my more theoretical topics and hand over to Khan to come to the more practical use cases.
Thank you, Dirk. Yes, that's right. We now want to shed light on certain aspects of what we just covered. And I would like to show you some practical use cases and picked out the example of how to structure and build a risk model to assess our money laundering risk. So let's have a look first at our business-wide risk assessment from an overall AFC risk assessment perspective. So you might have different topics that you want to assess. And you could, of course, build such a simple risk model and try to implement or include all the relevant risk categories and risk factors for all these topics into one model. But that can be quite complex. And a simple risk assessment method that just consists of what's your expert opinion on the likelihood or the impact of each risk might also not be very suitable, since it's less transparent, it's not objective, and it's also hard to validate the effectiveness and also the accuracy of this risk assessment. So if we have a look just at the money laundering risk, it's of course common, and I'm pretty sure that it's also the case for your organization, that we want to break it down in order to have a structured methodology and approach that reduces a little bit the complexity. So, and not everything, all the expertise and experience in your head is just reflected in one risk rating, but you make it transparent to third parties by building such a structure. So when you have this structure, you now want to look into the different sources using the different techniques that we just learned in order to find a right method to assess each of these risk dimension. And looking at these two examples of geographical risk and product risk, I have put some just exemplary sources where you can get all these risk factors from. Of course, these are just very obvious sources. You have a lot of experience and knowledge in your own organization. You understand how money laundering is conducted, so you understand what the real risk factors are. So, but of course, it's always key to be able to demonstrate, especially to a regulator, that you have integrated all the risk factors that are regulatory required to be considered are also reflected in your risk model. So you can use, so if you have these risk factors in your risk model, you can always refer those to the sources, to the official sources. So it's quite a clear documentation that you have considered all these different regulatory requirements. So we have the risk categories, which I showed on the previous slide. So this can be found, for example, in the EBA risk factors guidelines, but also in the same guidelines, you can find relevant risk factors related to a product risk or to a country risk. For example, the level of transparency of a product provide you a hint of whether it's a more higher or lower money laundering risk, as well as the effectiveness of a jurisdiction's AML and CFT regime. Of course, it's an indicator for the risk level of the specific country. Other sources can be, of course, other regulatory regulations. Here, as an example, the 6 EU AML directive. There you have a list in the appendix of lower risk variables, but also high risk variables. So we have the complexity of the product, which is mentioned, as well as level of criminal activities for the assessment of country risk. Of course, what I found most interesting and also more useful in real life is really to read the typologies and the real cases, so to get a better understanding of how money laundering is really carried out. And the challenge by reading these typologies is, of course, to get an abstract risk factor out of this real life scenario. And if we have this an example case where we have the situation that a lot of cash transactions found on an account, and it's then being transferred to abroad, and then it's now the task to identify what is the objective or abstract risk factor related to a product. So which means rapid movement of funds can be an indicator of the product to have a higher money laundering risk, for example. So going back to our business-wide risk assessment, this means that, as you can see, we have a lot of sources. We can have so many risk factors that we need to consider for each of these risk dimension. That's why it might also be best practice to break that down one more layer and to have on an individual risk assessment level to separately consider the countries first where you operate and also the products that you are providing. So you don't need to include all these different risk factors in one big risk model, because on that level you might want to consider institution-specific aspects as well, such as which products are you providing or offering, and what proportion of the business does each product have, for example. So let's go now to our example in a platform that you can use. But before that, maybe we just want to consider one more use case, that after you have built your initial risk model, you have to monitor legal changes, which means if you have new regulatory guidelines, even new regulations, you need to ensure that all these aspects are updated in your risk model as well. So if you are using a module, which is, for here as an example, our legal change management module, which helps you to automate this process of this legal change monitoring, it helps you to automatically identify new regulations on the web automatically and add this to a repository, which you find here in our example, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. And it will notify you and also provides you with basic information of this new regulation, of this document, as well as a list of obligations that can be automatically extracted out of this regulation. So if we look into the details of the second obligation here, risk-rate AI systems by the risk-based approach, you get also some information and the content and the details of each obligation. And by considering the content of what the obligation is about, you then will be able to identify in what aspect you need to update your risk model. So, for example, do you need a new risk category? Do you need a new risk factor? And then you can refer this new regulation as the source for your risk factor. So now, let's take a look at how this can be done in a system. So I will switch to our risk assessment platform where you can build a risk.
So, might be that we have a technical challenge. No, he or she is back.
I'm back. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just kicked out meeting. Yeah, so now let's have a look at the risk assessment platform. So I have here with me an example. Here, this is our risk assessment platform with the possibility to create different types of risk models. Let's have a look at the product risk model that we just talked about. Here are the different risk factors. Now here we can find the complexity that we've taken out of the 6 EU AML directive, as well as the rapid movement of funds. That's right. This is taken from our typology report. So you can add all these aspects into the risk model in order to assess all your products. So now taking the new EU AI Act, you might want to update the existing risk model. And this tool helps you to create a new version based on the existing one so that you have an audit trail and you can keep track of older historical used risk models. So now let's create a new risk model version 1.1 based on the first one. And then we can start updating the risk model. In that case, of course, you have different options to do so, but we opt for a new risk group and we just added technology as a new group. And a new aspect to consider if you when assessing your product, and we just add a new risk factor of AI technology integration. So we need to consider, does this product include AI technology? And here in the description, you could also name the regulation, specifically the AI EU Act here, so that you always have a reference. So as an indicator, we can use the questionnaire method in order to acquire these information. So we can have a product expert in your organization to fill in the questionnaire and to answer all the questions about an assessed product. So if you have, as an example, what Dirk mentioned before, an embedded ecosystem in your portfolio, which integrates AI technology, you might want to include the new risk model in your next year's risk assessment. So here is another example how you can create on an individual risk assessment level a risk model to assess individual countries. So a separate risk model just looking for your countries. We have different risk dimensions, AML, CFT, ABC, you name it. And here you can use external indexes in order to get all these risk factors answered. So you don't need to research everything yourself when you have those sources available. So when you then start assessing all the countries that are relevant for your organization, you can get a report analysis out of the risk assessment, and you can get a quick overview of where are your high-risk countries. You can export these information and also use it for your AML monitoring system, for example. Then the next level would be our enterprise-wide risk assessment. So after you have all the results to the high-risk countries, to the products that you have in your portfolio, you then now create the different risk dimensions that we had a look at. And now you can really focus on the different risk categories of your products and taking into account, for example, do you offer any high-risk products? So, and then what is the percentage of the revenue? So you can have some quantitative information here as well to bring more objectivity into your risk assessment and integrate information, data from other systems in your organization in order to raise the quality of your risk assessment. And you see it's very transparent because you have a clear structure for each of the purpose of what you want to assess. And now just a quick look. Of course, you then can go up to the AFC level and look into all of the different risk categories from the anti-financial crime realm. Okay, so here you can even use the likelihood and impact methodology, because if you select very likely or major impact, you can always trace back and provide the database for the answers that you're providing here. All right, thank you very much. That was it for our use case. I hope you found it a little helpful and maybe you have taken with you some inspirations maybe to adjust or improve your own risk assessment process. Thank you, Dirk, and I will give back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Khan. Pretty impressive presentation, especially about covering the whole life cycle, as I mentioned before, when you have to update because of a legal change your whole risk assessment, or at least just get a link on where to update the risk assessment. And of course, it's not showing by Khan because the time won't fit for that one. But of course, you can really automate the whole line of those components, and can get the legal change module understanding your existing risk assessments, and then, let's say, tell you where to exactly add or update your risk assessment and to identify new risk for your organization. Yeah, so we have still some minutes left, 3 minutes if I'm seeing that right, for your questions. You can send them in the chat. You can also send them by email if you don't want to use this forum and asking your questions. You can also contact us on our specific risk assessment landing page, but also as shown in the chat by info@msg-compliance.com. or through LinkedIn, Xing, and whatsoever this other one is. I guess it's YouTube, where you can find some more interesting stuff and helpful information on anti-financial crime topics as well. So, as there are actually not that many questions, obviously, in the chat, Khan, from a practical use case perspective, what do you think is the most difficult topic that you have to consider when providing a risk assessment for a financial service institute?
Mm-hmm. So my personal opinion is really to handle and really get this overview of all the different sources, all the different knowledges, expertise that exists everywhere, internally and externally, and to get it into this method, a structure, in the structure of risk models. I think that is, for me personally, I found very challenging to really ensure that you have not forgotten anything and you really consider all the different aspects without naming it concretely and have it like a big complex risk model.
Yeah, would agree on that one. I also think one of the main and major challenges is to keep it up to date, and looking to the regulators. It's always about being, let's say, more on a real time than on an annual updating cycle. So that's also a very important topic, and that's where the typical tools like Excel, PowerPoint, SharePoint are coming to, let's say, a natural ending here, because it's really hard to keep a consistent perspective and just to update it in the required frequency without making major errors in those sheets.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess we are, not I'm guessing, I know that we are at the end of our time. So it's 45 minutes. Very interesting 45 minutes from my perspective, Khan. Many thanks to you for the use cases, for the practical use cases. Thank you all for staying with us and spending your time on this topic of how to assess and identify risk and build a risk model. Would appreciate if you also join us in our future webinars. So let's stay tuned and be ready for further input and further best practices. Thank you all and have a nice day.
Thank you. See you next time.